everyone, this is Ashley Ellenboss with Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary, and today is our second class of our series on how to select and choose the right herbs based on herbal energetics. So if you haven't watched the first video in this series, it's an introduction. It'll be very helpful to you, so you can go back and look at that. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. Please like this video if it's helpful, and also click on notifications so you can know when my next video comes out. So today we'll be talking about herbs for hot conditions, and we'll explore what is heat, how does it manifest in the body, and how do you select the right herbs that will help with these hot conditions. So I'm going to pull up my slides. I'm going to see if I can do it a little faster than last time. You know, this is always a work in progress. Also, last time my phone was buzzing, so I turned it off this time. So sorry about that. You know, these things happen. All right. Hot conditions. Let's talk about it. So in the first introductory class, I talked about the element of fire. So just to review, fire likes to go upward, right? If you think of a forest fire blazing through a dry forest, it's going to go up and it's going to spread outward. So when we think about heat in the body, we want to think about it the same. Generally speaking, heat patterns tend to move upward. So when we have a lot of heat in the body, it can cause headaches. It can often cause redness in the face. It doesn't cause redness in the feet. Heat usually causes redness that moves upward. So we'll see that manifest in the skin on the face. It may manifest in skin conditions on the scalp. You know, again, typically it's more on the top surfaces of the skin. So just think about the way that fire behaves, and we'll often get a good picture of how maybe this pathology is happening in the body. Now, one thing that's interesting about the element of fire is that fire tends to dry things out, right? You know, think about the way that it burns through dry wood. However, we can get heat from dampness. You might be wondering, well, how does that happen? Well, it can happen if things ferment. So I'm just going to go to our last slide. Sorry for my barking dog. She is like the most tiny, vicious watchdog, alerting us of everything, including squirrels. So sorry about that. All right, so here is our little chart, which is super helpful. So if we look at the element, or we look at the quality rather, of hot, we can see that hot is connected to both wet and dryness. So again, the most obvious is fire, which is hot and dry, but we can have an air imbalance too, which is hot and wet. So if you think about, for example, a marsh that is very boggy, there's heat that's cooking all of the decomposing leaves and maybe decomposing fish bodies. I don't know, it can get pretty gross in like a swampy area, but there's usually like a kind of a putrid smell to a swamp because of everything that's hot and wet and decomposing. So that can happen in our bodies too. We can have heat and dampness, which can cause a buildup of toxicity. And often for me, I see this in clients who have just lethargy. They're just, maybe they have depression. In traditional, the six tissue states, and in traditional Greek medicine, they saw depression as being physiologically caused by damp heat in the body. So you have to kind of like, when I lived in DC, you know, drain the swamp. That's what, you know, can really be helpful for states of psychological depression. Now, not all depression, but certain types of depression can be really aided by cooling and drying the system out. So if we think about depressed mental state, but also just think of a depressed tissue state, think about tissues that are hot and boggy and maybe inflamed and sensitive to the touch. This is something that is hot and wet. So we need to employ some dryness to balance that out. So you may want to combine this video with the dry video so you can look at how this is done. So let's look at how hot conditions manifest very specifically in the body. Think about heat as exaggerating function. So if something is acting more you know, exaggeratedly than it's supposed to. Like, for example, your immune system is hyperactive. Your heart rate is hyperactive. Your nervous system is in a hyperreactive response state. This could also be more like an anxiety type of mental state. If you're overstimulated, this is considered to be heat. Inflammation is an obvious one. Cardiovascular issues, think about, again, we're raising the pressure and the heat in the body. So high blood pressure, where we're pushing more blood through the arteries, which creates strain and often inflammation in the arteries themselves, is considered heat. Any sort of dry or red skin condition is often related to heat. We said sensitivity, and then along with allergies, which is a hyperactive immune response, we can also have autoimmunity. So if you think about yourself or maybe someone else or your clients you're working with or friends and family or your children that you want to help, is this present? Do you see any of this excitation, as sometimes it's called, overstimulation, heat, any of these symptoms happening? Then cooling herbs might be the best way to help address them. So our strategy is to cool things down, and then depending on whether it's dry or damp, you can either moisten or dry, right? But let's just focus on the cooling piece, because that's what this video is about. So we want to reduce heat. We can do that by increasing water, because whether or not this is a damp or a dry associated heat, water will help, because number one, water will hydrate and help with dryness. It will also help detoxification if there's dampness. So if you increase your water intake, that can also help flush out toxicity. We also want to use herbs that are going to quell the inflammatory response and provide compounds for healing. So for example, flavonoids, which we're going to be talking about, are wonderful for reducing inflammation and for repairing broken like arteries and blood vessels, not repairing the blood vessels, but creating the nutrition and that anti-inflammatory state so that the tissues can repair themselves. So this is all going to be very helpful. And for those of you who are not herbalists, I wanted to make this video not too overwhelming with the chemistry bit. So we're going to talk about chemistry and tastes as being connected. This is how, when somebody taught me about connecting chemistry and taste together, it just blew my mind, and it really helped me to understand. And that way, when I would taste herbs, I could actually taste what chemicals were in there. So that I'm going to try this with you guys. Tell me how it works. Okay, so the tastes that are going to be cooling are sour and bitter. The sour taste often comes from flavonoids, which are very, very cooling. Also, sometimes cyanogenic glycosides, which are a little bit bitter, but they slow down the Krebs cycle, which is the process of oxidation. So when we have something that's sour, it's going to cool and slow down that oxidative process. We also have bitter as a taste, which is often, bitter is actually something that's very interesting because it's found in pretty much every single plant. Every plant has some element of bitter, some more than others. So pretty much every compound out there can have some bitter element to it. However, the most bitter compounds are alkaloids, iridoids, and then our different glycosides, including the cyanogenic glycosides. Okay, now for something useful. Where do we find these? Where are they? How do we use this information? Well, again, if you think about foods, and specifically in the case of foods that are going to be cooling, think about ones that are high in flavonoids and phenolics. These are commonly found in every berry that you can imagine. So, the ones that you can pick up from your local farmer's market or your grocery store: strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, black raspberries, all of those berries that are high in pigment are very high in flavonoids and phenolics. And the reason why this works in our body as it does is because these flavonoids are sunscreen for the plant. So the plants don't want their berries to burn, so they create these pigments, and these pigments stop the UV radiation from damaging these very sensitive tissues. And guess what it does in our body too? It's also antioxidant, and it cools and protects the inside of our body, including all of our cells. One of the little mnemonic devices that Matthew Wood, one of my teachers, taught me was, whenever you're thinking about heat, think about your simple sour sedatives, SSS. These are cooling. So simple sour sedatives are going to be herbs with our sour flavonoids. Now, my favorite one to use is hawthorn. It is very safe for people on most medications. Maybe there's just a few. I'm thinking about one of the reference books I was reading, which was that it can lower blood pressure. So, if your blood pressure, if you are on a high dose blood pressure medication, you might want to be careful because it will lower your blood pressure. But guess what? You might be able to get off your medication. Of course, with your doctor's full knowledge, right? Talk to your doctor about it. But you can use Hawthorne alongside blood pressure medications under supervision of medical doctors to help you lower your dose. So that's one herb. Another one are amala berries, which is an Ayurvedic berry that's found in Triphala, and it's also known as Indian gooseberry. These are very high in flavonoids. Schisandra berries, elderberries, bilberries, and guess what? Even lemon balm is high in flavonoids, and it has that little bit of that sour flavor. And all of these herbs are very easy to use. They can be taken in tea form. They can be made into a syrup, especially the berries, and tincture form. Now, I'm not going to go into individual doses, but you may, this might be a place where you can look it up, and I'll provide some resources in terms of dosing at the end. Now, how about our bitters? Our bitters, again, these are often caused by the most common compounds are alkaloids and iridoids, but again, pretty much everything is a little bitter. And so the herbs that are going to be most helpful that have that bitter taste are going to be our gentle roots that are like dandelion root, burdock root, even chicory root. These are gentle, very gentle, almost like food-like gentle bitters. And these can, you can take these in a pretty moderate dose. This is like, you can cook them into a stew. People eat dandelion roots, they slice them up in their salad. So this is something that can be eaten pretty generously. I like to decoct them, which means that you boil them in water with a covered lid for about 15 minutes, or not boil it, more like a simmer, and then let it sit for maybe 20, 30 minutes and then strain and drink it. But if that's too much for you, a tincture will work very well also. And then for our stronger bitters, gentian and wormwood are excellent and very, very have a long history of use in bitters that have been used in aperitifs to stimulate digestion before meals in places throughout Europe and Italy. So these are again, they have a long history of use. They are lower dose. So these are not ones that you're going to cook with unless you really don't want to enjoy your food because they are so bitter. So these herbs are best when combined with other bitter aromatics, which would be things like fennel or orange peel or cardamom. So you can find one of my favorite bitters blends is called Original Bitters by herbalists and alchemists. And I'll try to remember to include a link, but that has a good balance of bitters. So that's another great way to take them in. And you can always combine them. Like the Original Bitters formula I just mentioned does have dandelion root in it along with gentian. Okay, now this is the part that I thought you might be most interested in because what we talked about were generalities, but now I'm going to tell you and just show you how this works when it comes to looking at herbs and energetics by their system. And this is a really cool thing about how plants work, is that they have organ affinities. We don't understand exactly how this works, but we do know that herbs tend to go to specific organ systems. Now, we know that partially this is because of the way that detoxification works in our body, that things that are broken down by the stomach or broken down by the liver or more broken down in the small intestine, that these, the body will kind of pull those compounds towards those detoxification sites. But we also know that some compounds have an affinity to places like the reproductive organs, like black cohosh has an affinity to the uterine tissue. So it's a very cool cooperative existence. This is the spirit element of, of the five elements, where there is a cooperative piece of how herbs work in the body, and there's this organ affinity that the plants have, that they just go to where they're needed. So what I'm going to talk about now is just break down some of the major systems and conditions, not all of them, but just to give you a sense of like how this might look. So let's say, for example, you are someone who has high blood pressure, you have cardiovascular heat, maybe you get flushed cheeks very much, maybe you sweat a lot, maybe you are on the brink of having to go on high blood pressure medication. So for that type of heat, then sour sedatives are going to be a great ally. And so some of my favorite herbs that have an affinity for the cardiovascular system and are cooling and sour are going to be hawthorn and yarrow. They both have an affinity for the cardiovascular system and they're cooling. So those are like my top two there. And then berries, of course, any of the berries I mentioned before, both to eat and to use as medicines. Now, how about the digestive system? This is very common. People have maybe irritable bowel disease, maybe they have colitis or any of the inflammatory bowel diseases. So if you have any disease of the digestive system that's inflammatory in nature, that can also be food allergies, then what you will want to do is not only support and cool those inflamed and hyperactive tissues. But you also are going to want to increase the digestive capacity of your liver, your gallbladder, and your stomach. And bitters are going to do that for you. They're going to increase the production of the all of the digestive enzymes that your body needs and the pepsin and all of those compounds to help you break down food more efficiently and then also to reduce inflammation throughout the system. So I wrote all of them really. Find a bitters blend that works for you. Herbalists and alchemists, you can look that up. They have 5 different bitters blends. So you can look at all of them and see which one most closely fits your needs. And gentian is probably one of my favorites. So is wormwood. There was a study that was done. I went to hear this speaker who did a whole talk on bitters, and he mapped out. He's this Danny O'Rourke. He's an Irish. Yeah, he's an Irish herbalist, and he came and he did a presentation at the American Herbalist Guild Symposium several years back. And part of his research was he looked at all of the bitter compounds or all of the bitter herbs and all of the different bitter receptor sites that they plug in the body. And it's interesting to note that we have bitter receptor sites, not just in our tongue, but we have bitter receptor sites in our heart. That's the second highest place. We have them throughout our gut. We have bitter receptor sites in our brain. So there's a lot more research to be done as to why we have bitter receptor sites throughout our body. But his hypothesis was that they're gently stimulating the way that our body responds. And so it's like a little bit of a toxic, effect, like just like a little bit of a poison stimulates the body to respond and to kind of upkeep and detoxify a little more quickly. So I think that's interesting. So, okay, what I was going to say though was that he found in his study, again, had this beautiful chart, which I haven't been able to get a hand on, of all the herbs and all the receptors. It was like a chart like this. And the one herb that plugged the most bitter receptors in the body was wormwood. So if you want to hit every single site, and one of the things that they found is that some bitter receptor sites have been shown to alleviate depression. So maybe if that's something you're working on, try wormwood. Drop doses. You don't need much. If you're taking it alone, I usually have my clients start with 2 drops and maybe build up to 3 drops and just do that once in the morning for a week and then do it in the morning and evening after that first week is done. So it's very, very low dose. How about the nervous system? This is a place where we can have a lot of heat, excitation, overwhelm, anxiety. So this is a great place for combination to combine your sour and your bitters together with some nervine sedatives that are also going to be cooling. So I would think about maybe doing something like Schisandra, which is an adaptogen that's very, very sour, maybe with a little bit of gentian or maybe wormwood, which is very bitter, and then using some nervine bitters like blue vervain, lemon balm, or passion flower. Any of those would be really nice in combination. So for most people out there, you'll probably have to buy these in tincture form in separate bottles and just combine them on your own. And that will work really nicely. Now, for allergic or immune heat, where your immune system is hyperactive, think about sour sedatives with immune modulators. So all those sour herbs, again, I might think about hawthorn and Schisandra might be another good one here, and some elderberry, which is really good for allergic and immune modification and modulation. But I would also add in an herb like echinacea Or medicinal mushrooms like reishi is excellent for helping manage allergies. And there's been studies, some people wonder, well, what if I have a candida overgrowth or fungal infections? If I'm allergic to fungi, if you're allergic to fungi, don't take reishi. But if you have like a yeast overgrowth, that's not going to be any affected at all by reishi. So try reishi, shiitake, maitake, turkey tail. All of those are really going to be helpful for reducing that hyper responsivity to allergens, whether that's pollen, dust, or food. Okay. All right. I hope that was helpful. Again, there's probably a million others. There's so many other things we could talk about. But again, I just want to give you snippets so then you can use your own mind and think about how this can be applied to other systems and other conditions. All right. So last but not least, with all of the herbs in place, I would also recommend that you increase water, decrease sugar, alcohol, and caffeine if you're dealing with heat. Increase fresh fruit and steamed vegetables are really good on the body. And if you can, start adding in some sort of restful activity. And that could be meditation, that could be yoga, it could be Tai Chi, it could be chanting on your japa beads or like doing a meditative japa chanting practice. Anything like that will cool the heat of the body and the mind. And that will all be very helpful. So that is, I guess I was going to say one more thing, which was, after considering the elemental pattern, multiple compounds might be used. So you might want to think about, again, watching the other videos. And, if you want to add in, if the condition is hot and dry, then when we look at dry conditions, you can see which herbs you might want to add in there as well. So next up is cold conditions. What are they? What compounds do we need? Which plants have them? And how do we use them? And once again, thank you for watching. We're going to post our next talk on Monday. Please subscribe. Please like if you liked this. Please sign up for notifications so you can see my new videos. Share it with friends if you think they would find it helpful. And please come study with me and my husband, Achyuta Bhavadas, for our next upcoming series called Roots and Spheres, a Moon Circle. I'm really excited about this. It's going to meet twice a month, and we will be dieting plants. So we're going to be taking plants into our bodies, journaling. I'll have questions I'm going to write up for you to answer, to track your own experience of the plants in your body. Also, as we track out some of the transits, the astrological configurations in the sky that create pretty strong impacts on us. So I hope you'll join us for that. It'll start in January of 2023. We do have early bird pricing available and also need-based tuition. So please don't let cost keep you from this course if you want to take it. There's lots of good options so that everyone can join. So I think that brings us to a close. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week or next class for a look at cold. Take care, everyone.